My people, lean in and listen close, for the world is a spinning wheel that can crush the unwary in a heartbeat. They say a secret is like a caged bird. Once you let it fly, you can never call it back. My name is Tay, and I learned this bitter lesson in the heart of Lagos, a city that never sleeps and never forgets. My father, Mr. Odigun, was a man of steel and silence. He built a kingdom of success from nothing, but he kept his pillars hidden from the sun. One afternoon, while the heat shimmered off the pavement, I sat with a neighbor who always had a kind word and a ready smile. I wanted to feel like a man, to show I knew the inner workings of my father's world. I whispered a secret about a private offshore investment, a treasure my father kept locked in the shadows. I thought I was just sharing a story with a friend. I did not see the neighbor's eyes turn sharp as a hawk's. As he walked away, he smirked, and I felt a sudden chill. I had no idea that my small boast was the first axe blow to our family tree. To the world, the Odigun family was a golden standard, a tall cedar tree that no wind could bend. We hosted a rooftop party for my sister's birthday, and it was a night carved from pure light. The air was thick with the scent of expensive spices, and the music flowed like wine. All the great names of Lagos were there, bowing to my father and whispering praises to my mother. We stood on top of the world, bathed in the glow of our own success. I walked through the crowd, feeling the pride of the son who belonged to a dynasty. But then I saw him standing by the glass railing. My cousin Lamy had arrived uninvited, a shadow in a room full of stars. Lamy was a man who carried envy in his pockets like heavy stones. He didn't join the laughter or the toasts. He stood there with his arms crossed, watching my father with a gaze so cold it could freeze the ocean. He wasn't looking at our joy. He was measuring our walls for the siege. When he caught my eye, he didn't blink. He just stared, a silent predator waiting for the moon to set. Greed is a hungry fire that only grows when you try to feed it. After leaving our party, Lamy did not go home to rest. Instead, he drove to a dark office where the blue light of computer screens flickered like ghostly eyes. He met with a man who traded in digital poison, a social media influencer who sold reputations for a handful of silver. Lamy sat there, his face twisted into a mask of pure malice as he shared the secret I had carelessly whispered to the neighbor. He didn't just tell the truth. He added layers of lies until it sounded like my father had stolen the very sun from the sky. If I cannot sit on their throne, I will make sure no one can. Lamy hissed, his fingers tapping a rhythm of destruction on the table. He was ready to burn his own house down just to see the smoke rise from ours. He promised the influencer a harvest of fame if they could turn the Odigun name into a curse. The pact was made in the dark, and the first seeds of our ruin were planted deep in the earth. The first ripple of the storm hit us on a Tuesday morning, appearing as a small notification that changed our lives forever. An anonymous tip had leaked to press, a venomous bite that hinted at hidden wealth and secret shadows in the Odigun house. At first, it was just a whisper on a screen, but in Lagos, a whisper travels faster than the harmattan wind. By noon, the name of my father was being dragged through the digital gutters. People had smiled at us just days before now typed words of hate with fingers made of stone. The shock hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I watched my mother's face turn pale as she read the comments, her hands trembling like dry leaves. I stood by our window and saw the first line of journalists gathering at our gate, their cameras pointed at us like cannons. One reporter shouted a question about my father's offshore money, and I felt the air leave my lungs. My tiny mistake was no longer a secret. It was a monster that had grown too big for its cage. The public judgment had begun, and it was hungry. Lamy did not stop at the first leak. He wanted to see us crawl in the dust until our knees bled. He began to spread rumors that our success was built on the broken backs of the poor and illegal deals that would land us in chains. The traction on social media was a roar that drowned out all reason. At home, the silence was heavier than a mountain. My father paced the floors, his face a map of worry and hidden pain. He couldn't understand how the world had turned so sharply against him. One evening, his phone buzzed with a message that made his breath catch. It was from Lamy, though the number was hidden. "Everything you have built will fall like a house of cards," the message read, "and I will be the one to light the match." My father's hand shook as he showed me the screen. his eyes searching mine for an answer I was too afraid to give. The public shame was a heavy cloak that made every step a struggle. Tension at home grew until we were strangers in our own house. I saw our reputation falling away in chunks, and I felt the cold grip of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Just as the darkness seemed to be winning, a door opened in the wall of our despair. Aya Ao, a retired lawyer and an old friend of my grandmother, came to our house. She was a woman who walked a cane, but carried the wisdom of 1,000 years in her eyes. She pulled me into the garden, away from the prying eyes of the staff. "Tay," she said, her voice like the sound of grinding stones. "A boy who plays with fire should not be surprised when the roof burns. I know what you told the neighbor." I felt the world tilt under my feet. She didn't shout. She simply looked at me until I felt small. She explained how Lamy was using the power of envy to twist the city against us. She told me that greed always leaves a trail of crumbs for those who know how to look. She reached into her robe and pulled out a small USB drive. "Silver and cold. This has the truth that can save your father," she whispered. "But you must be a ghost, Tay. If you move too fast, the enemy will see you. If you move too slow, there will be nothing left to save." But before I could use the weapon Ao gave me, the first true betrayal sliced to the heart of our home. Our family assistant, a man who had eaten our bread for a decade, saw the ship sinking and decided to save his own skin. He secretly stole private documents from my father's study and handed them to Lamy in exchange for a bag of blood money. To hide his own crime, he told my father a terrible lie. He claimed he had seen me meeting with Lamy in the dark, framing me as the one who was selling our family out. My father, already blinded by the storm of rumors, did not ask for proof. He saw my guilt in the way I couldn't look him in the eye. He called me into the parlor, his voice a thunder that shook the windows. "You have bitten the hand that fed you," he roared, his face twisted in a mask of pure agony. He didn't listen to my cries. He saw me as a traitor to my own blood. He pointed to the gate and told me I was no longer a son. I was cast out into the street, heartbroken and alone. My father sent me to a cheap apartment on the edge of the city, a place where the walls were damp and the air tasted of salt and sorrow. He said I must learn responsibility in the mud since I had thrown away the palace. I lived in a room no bigger than a closet, listening to the roar of the city that had once been my playground. The isolation was a heavy stone on my chest. I spent my days staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had lost everything with a few foolish words. Guilt was my only companion, and it never slept. But then, I felt a strange prickle on my skin, the feeling of eyes watching me from the dark. One night, while I was trying to eat a bowl of rice, I saw a tiny red glint in the corner of the ceiling. It was a hidden camera, tucked away in the shadows. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I realized then that Lamy was not finished with me. Even in my exile, I was a prisoner. I was being watched like an animal in a zoo, and every tear I shed was likely being recorded for the world to mock. The realization that I was being watched made the very air in my room feel like a trap. I began to see digital ghosts everywhere I looked. Strange messages appeared on my phone, mocking my poverty and showing photos of me walking in the rain. Someone was controlling the narrative of my fall, making sure that my family saw me as a failure every single day. The paranoia was a cold wind that wouldn't stop blowing. I became afraid to speak, afraid to move, afraid to even dream. The rumors about my father grew wilder on the internet. Fueled by the secrets Lamy was twisting, I felt like a man drowning in a sea of shadows. Then, a message appeared on my screen that was different from the others. It was encrypted text that said, "You cannot fix this alone, Tay. The ghost in your room is only a shadow. Meet me at the old library at midnight. Come alone, or the fire will take everything." I didn't know if it was a friend or a new trap, but I had nothing left to lose. I waited for the moon to hide behind the clouds and slipped out of my room, moving like a ghost. The old library was a ruin of broken glass and forgotten stories. I found Aya Ao sitting in the back, surrounded by the smell of dust and ancient ink. She looked at me and sighed. "You have seen the face of the enemy now, Tay," she said. She spent the night teaching me the secrets of the digital world. showing me how Lamy used social networks to build a wall of lies around us. She taught me how to track the signals and how to expose the truth that was hidden in plain sight. In Lagos, the person who smiles the widest often carries the sharpest knife, she warned. She showed me how to use the information on the USB drive to build a counterstrike that would hit Lamy where it hurt the most, his pride. She told me that the person behind the cameras was closer than I thought, and that I must trust no one blindly. I felt a new strength growing in my bones, a determination that was harder than the steel of my father's business. I left the library with a plan in my heart, ready to fight for the name I had accidentally dragged through the dirt. I knew I needed a team to bring down a giant like Lamy. I reached out to two of my oldest friends who had not turned their backs on me, and a tech-savvy cousin who could find a needle in a digital haystack. I also recruited a social media influencer who had been bullied by Lamy's friends and was hungry for justice. We met in a small basement, the light of our laptops the only sun we saw. Together, we began to peel back the layers of Lamy's scheme. We found the bank records that showed him paying the neighbor and the influencer. We saw the plan he had built to take over my father's company once the reputation was fully destroyed. The courage of my friends was a shield that kept me moving through the fear. We worked until our eyes were red, uncovering the twisted path of betrayal. Then, we found the final piece of the puzzle. Lamy was planning a high-profile gala to celebrate his success, where he intended to publicly disgrace my father with doctored documents. The teamwork was our only hope, but we discovered that the gala was only days away. We had to move fast or lose forever. The tension in our small basement was like a stretched wire. Invitations to the gala were being shared all over the city, and everyone was talking about the final fall of the Adigun family. Lamy was boasting that he had proof that would lead to my father's arrest. I could feel the urgency in my blood, a ticking clock that wouldn't stop. If those documents were shown to the public, no amount of truth would ever wash away the stain. My mother was calling me in secret, her voice full of tears and terror. My father was a broken man, refusing to leave his room. I realized that the gala was the climax Lamy had been building toward for months. He wanted to destroy us on the biggest stage in Lagos. I told my team that we had to strike at the heart of the event. We had to find a way to switch the digital files before the world saw them. The shame of being called a traitor was a weight I carried every hour, and this was my only chance to put it down. We prepared our tools, but the fear of failure was a cold hand on my throat. The night of the gala arrived, and the hotel was a palace of light and danger. I dressed as a waiter, keeping my head low as I moved through the halls. My heart was a drum beating a rhythm of terror and hope. My plan was to hack into the main presentation system and replace Lamy's forged lies with the truth from the USB drive. I found the control room, a cold place filled with a hum of servers. My fingers flew over keys, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I could hear the muffled roar of the crowd in the ballroom, the sound of people waiting for execution. I was seconds away from the final override when the door creaked open. A security guard stood there, his flashlight beam cutting to the dark like a sword. "What are you doing in here?" he growled, his hand moving toward his belt. My blood turned to ice in my veins. If I was caught now, my family would be finished, and I would spend my life in a cell. I had to think fast, to use the ingenuity Aya Ao had taught me, or watch our name burn to ash on the giant screens. While I was fighting in the dark, my family was suffering in the light of the ballroom. My father sat at a table, his shoulders slumped as he faced the whispers of his enemies. My mother was beside him, her face a mask of grief. They felt the eyes of the city on them, waiting for the final blow. The social media world was already trending with the news of the Adigun scandal, and the fans had turned into a mob. The isolation was absolute. Even our closest friends had moved to other tables. My father looked at the empty chair where I should have been, his heart full of the lie that I had sold him out. I saw them through a small monitor in the control room, and the guilt almost made me fall. I managed to trick the guard by pretending I was a tech intern sent to fix a sudden glitch in the sound system. He looked at my badge, hesitated, and then nodded, moving away to check the door. I turned back to the screen, my hands shaking so hard I could barely type. I had 1 minute to save the people who had given me everything. I vowed silently, I will fix this. Lamy took the stage with a smile that was wider than the moon. He looked at the crowd and began to speak, his voice full of fake sorrow for the crimes of his family. But then, he turned his malice to a new level. He used a remote trigger to hack into our family's private accounts, leaking intimate messages and photos onto the giant screens for everyone to see. The ballroom erupted in a roar of shock and laughter. My father's face turned the color of ash. Then, the most terrible move of all, a live-streamed video appeared, doctored to show my father in a compromising position with a business rival. It went viral in seconds, a digital fire that no one could put out. The shame was a physical weight that made my mother collapse into her chair. Lamy stood there, soaking in the glory of our destruction, his face projected large on the wall like a demon of the night. I watched from the control room, my eyes burning with rage. The villain was at the peak of his power, and I was the only one who could stop the match from hitting the gasoline. It was now or never. But truth has a way of hiding in plain sight for those with the courage to look. While Lamy was gloating, I found the evidence in the very system he was using. He had been so arrogant that he hadn't deleted the original, unedited files. I saw the raw footage that proved the video was a forgery, a puppet show made of pixels and hate. I also found the messages where he had discussed the price of our reputation with the influencer. I felt a surge of moral clarity that made my mind sharp as a needle. I had the proof that would turn the world upside down. But I had to find a way to reveal it before the next viral post destroyed what was left of my father's soul. The suspense was a ticking clock in my head, every second a heartbeat of danger. I began the upload, my fingers moving with a speed born of desperation. I had to break through Lamy's final firewall before he could finish his speech. I knew that once I hit enter, there was no going back. The truth was about to meet the lie in a head-on collision, and I was the one driving the car. I knew that a simple leak wouldn't be enough to stop a man like Lamy. I orchestrated a counterexposure that would hit the live TV interview being broadcast from the gala. I wanted the whole country to see the mask fall. I initiated the sequence, and suddenly, the screens in the ballroom began to flicker. The fake video of my father vanished, replaced by a wall of static. I felt a rush of anticipation that made my heart roar. Lamy froze on the stage, his face turning from triumph to confusion. He realized someone was fighting back from inside his own fortress. He grabbed his tablet and tried to sabotage the broadcast in real time, his fingers flying in a desperate dance. We were two warriors fighting in a digital arena of light and shadow. The audience stood in stunned silence, watching the battle play out on the giant walls. It was a race against time, a fight for the very air we breathed. I pushed through his defenses, using the tricks Aya Ao had taught me about the city's treacherous maze. I could feel his panic through the screen, the sound of a predator realizing it was now the prey. At the height of the struggle, a final piece of the puzzle fell into place. A close friend of Lamy, a man who had been part of the scheme but couldn't live with the shame of the doctored video, turned witness. He secretly sent an encrypted file to my team, providing the final proof of Lamy's financial theft from the family accounts. The betrayal was revealed from within the villain's own circle. The friend's message was a whisper of hope. He won't stop until he destroys everything. End him now. I felt a wave of shock and then a cold, hard focus. I added this new evidence to the broadcast, showing the bank transfers that proved Lamy was the one who was corrupt. The truth was now an avalanche that no one could stop. Lamy looked at the screen and saw his own crimes being displayed for the world to see. The tension in the room was so thick, it was hard to breathe. The friend's warning was the final nail in the coffin. I hit the final command, and the ballroom was filled with the sound of Lamy's own voice, bragging about how he would ruin us. The mask was gone. The viral twist happened in a heartbeat. The very same influencer Lamy had used now turned on him, sharing the proof of his lies to millions of followers. The public judgment shifted like a great wave, turning away from my father and crashing down on Lamy. I watched as the comments on the live stream turned from hate to a roar for justice. The suspense was a physical force as the police began to move toward the stage. Lamy, realizing his scheme was collapsing, went public on a microphone, threatening to sue and screaming that it was all a hack. He tried to escalate the feud, but he was a man shouting into a storm. The city that had laughed at us now watched with open mouths as the truth was revealed. I saw my father look up at the screen, his eyes filling with tears as he saw my face appearing in the corner of the broadcast, explaining the truth. He realized that I was not the traitor he had feared. I was the son who had walked through the fire to bring him home. Justice was in progress, and it was a beautiful, terrifying thing to see. The climax reached its peak as I walked out from behind the curtain and onto the stage. I was no longer a ghost. I was the witness. I stood before Lamy, holding my laptop like a sword. The ballroom was silent. Every eye fixed on the confrontation. Lamy looked at me with a hatred so deep it was like a black hole. "You think you've won?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a desperate hubris. He tried one final move. He pulled a small device from his pocket, intending to delete the family's entire bank history. But my team was faster. We had already locked him out of the main system. I looked him in the eye and said, "The truth does not need a password." The shock on his face was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. He tried to lung at me, but security guards he had once controlled now held him back with iron grips. The confrontation was over. The villain had fallen into the pit he had dug for us. The audience erupted in a roar of confusion and relief. My father stood up, his face a map of pride and sorrow, and I knew the world had changed forever. Lamy's downfall was spectacular and absolute. As the police led him away in handcuffs, his attempt to save himself only made it worse. He began to shout accusations at his own partners, exposing even more of his crimes in his panic. He lost his credibility, his wealth, and his place in the city in a single hour. Poetic justice was served cold. I watched him being pushed into the back of a police car, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face a mask of defeat. He left the gala a humiliated man, a warning to anyone who thinks they can build a life on the ruins of another's. I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet after the storm. The man who had tried to destroy us with a tiny mistake had been destroyed by his own giant pride. I stood on the stage, the lights of the gala shining on me, and I realized that the real cost of betrayal is the soul of the one who commits it. Lamy was gone, a powerless ghost in the history of our family. The city of Lagos watched him fall, and the lesson was written in the stars for everyone to read. The emotional payoff was a wave that washed away the months of pain. My father walked onto the stage and hugged me in front of the entire city. His public praise was a balm to my wounded heart, and my mother's tears were finally ones of joy. Our family was reunited, the bridge between us rebuilt with the stones of truth. The reputation that had been shattered was slowly being restored, piece by precious piece. We left the hotel as a family, walking to the crowd that now whispered our names with respect. The reconciliation was the sweetest victory of all. I felt the weight of the last few months lift off my shoulders, leaving me light enough to fly. My father looked at me with eyes that finally saw me as a man. We went home to the house that had once felt like a prison, and it was finally a home again. But as I sat in the quiet of my old room, I felt a strange sense that there was still shadow lingering. One final twist remained, a reminder that the world is a complex maze where every choice is a ripple that never truly stops. The next morning, I learned a hidden truth that made my heart go cold. I discovered that the neighbor who had first betrayed me wasn't just a friendly stranger. He had been a professional informant, paid by a rival company of Lamys to find any crack in the Adigun family. My tiny mistake had been a tool in a much larger game of chess than I had ever imagined. The realization brought a deep sense of humility and vigilance. I saw that in a city like Lagos, manipulation is endless, and no secret is ever truly safe. It taught me the real cost of a careless word. I vowed to never be so blind again. I saw how my father's silence was a shield he had built to protect us from a world of predators. The neighbor had vanished into the shadows of the city, leaving me with a lesson that would last a lifetime. No secret is too small to matter, and no trust should be given without a foundation. I looked at the city skyline and realized that I was a different person now. I was no longer a boy. I was a guardian of the family gate. Redemption is a long road, but we began to walk it with our heads held high. My family and I decided to use our wealth to start a foundation that teaches integrity and digital safety to the youth of Lagos. We wanted to turn our pain into a lesson for others, to show that a family can survive even the worst betrayal if they stand together. I became a mentor to younger kids, teaching them about the power of their words and the ripple effect of their choices. I felt a sense of inspiration and hope that was stronger than the pride I had once carried. My father and I worked side by side, building a business that was based on transparency and truth. Aya Ao visited us often, her smile a quiet blessing on our new lives. One tiny mistake can teach the greatest lesson, she told me one evening as we watched the sunset. I realized that my fall had been the very thing that taught me how to stand. We were redeemed, not just in the eyes of the city, but in our own hearts. Our family was a fortress once again, but this time the walls were made of light. So, my people, as the moon rises over the city, I leave you with this final thought. One careless word can indeed ruin a life, but honesty, courage, and humility can heal an entire family. I now teach my own children that the tongue is a small thing that can start a very large fire. I show them that trust is a treasure that must be guarded with our lives. Our reputation may be what people think of us, but our character is who we are when the cameras are off. I look at my father and mother, now older and wiser, and I thank the storm for showing us the strength of our roots. Every parent must watch their children, and every child must watch their heart, for the world is always listening. Do not let your mistakes be your end. Let them be the beginning of your wisdom. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Could you find the heart to forgive, or the courage to fix the damage before it's too late? The city of Lagos keeps its secrets, but the truth will always find its way home. What lesson will you take from this story?